That's the Sharia. In the country of the United States, the Sharia is the Constitution of the United States. And that is what all of our scholars have said.
You know, I'm more pro-free speech than any of this. I fully support the right of people to actually insult the Prophet in the United States because I think that's the best regime for human happiness.
Does medieval Islamic law prescribe the death penalty for extramarital sex? Yes, it does. Yes, it does. It does prescribe the death penalty for extramarital, not premarital. Adultery, basically. Yes, it does. But once again, how often was this law actually applied even in medieval times? Even according to our own medieval scholars, this law is actually meant more as something in the books to terrify you, rather than to actually implement. Should they be updated and modernized? Again, that's an ongoing discussion, and that's one of the main sources of intra-Muslim dialogue. We are debating amongst ourselves. You know, I'm sure many Jews and many Christians understand this. The texts say things that are somewhat problematic at times. All religious people know what I'm talking about here, right? The texts have some laws that are somewhat bizarre, and this is all texts. But I, as a national American cleric, when I go to sleep at night, it's not my primary concern, what do I do with the texts about adultery? Because we're not calling for the implementation of Islamic law in America. I don't know of a single organization or cleric or institute that is saying, let's abolish the US Constitution and let's supplant it with the Sharia.
This is what they've done. So this so-called fascist Turkish government that's being presented to Western people is removing a lot of the darkness that had descended upon the people from before. But people are very worried. You know, there's people that are secular and they think, oh, these are the Muslims taking over. Well, they're Muslim people, but they're committed to a secular state, right? And the idea that Islam and secularity are mutually exclusive is false, because the vast majority of Islamic history had relatively secular states. They weren't really Islamic states. The whole concept of an Islamic state is a fantasy in the minds of a lot of the modern Islamists. But if you actually study Muslim history, that you will find, yes, Islam was the state religion, but the states functioned just like a secular state functions, because religion actually has very little to do with the running of a state. Building roads has nothing to do with what madhab you follow. You know, oh, that's a Hanafi road. No, that's a madhab. Right? The madhab means road in Arabic, but madhab is a school, is a metaphor taken from the real madhab, which is a road. No, a road is, you can build it from stone, you can build it from asphalt, you can build it from concrete, and that's just what you want is honesty, you want vetting, you want transparency. Those are secular ideals as well, right? A post office is not an Islamic concept, right? You don't need, we need Islamic stamps. Yeah, you can put the head of, like Muslims had La ilaha illallah on their coins. Okay. In America, they have kind of La ilaha illallah, tawakkalna ala Allah. That's, right? I mean, that's okay. America's a secular state. It still has tawakkalna ala Allah, right? So that's okay. You can have, in God we trust. It's not, you can be secular and still trust in God. It's okay, right? Municipalities are not, you know, the water doesn't, I need a Hanafi, you know, they call it Hanafiya in Arabic. I need a Hanafiya. This is a Maliki Hanafiya. No, you don't need, you just need a Hanafiya. You just need a water, right, tap that works. And that's municipalities, and all you want is some honest guy in there. If he's a secularist who's honest, fine. If he's a Muslim who's honest, fine. As long as the water gets there, it's been purified, it's not going to make you sick, right? Seriously, think about it. The vast majority of government just does not relate to religion. It just relates to common decency. And that's why you can live I mean, if Muslims were literally taken from like 8th century Syria or Palestine and dropped into Norway, they would think that, it was like the caliphate of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. Like there's so much social justice. They would be amazed at how much social justice are in these Scandinavian countries. They're secular countries. So this whole idea, but no, you have to have had punishment. This is what, so Islam is reduced to, there's 4 agreed upon had punishments, 13, there's debates about, even apostasy laws, all these things, they're all debated. There's nothing fixed in stone. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Idra'u al-hudud mastata'tum." Avoid implementing penal punishments as much as you're able to. No, we'll cut, let's get these hands cut off. I mean, if you implemented had punishment for theft, you couldn't shake hands anymore. You wouldn't be able to shake hands. Everybody'd be like, nice to meet you, right? I mean, from the president all the way down to the street sweeper, man. We would. Am I making this up?
من أرضى الناس بسخط الله سخط الله عليه وأسخط عليه الناس ومن أرضى الله بسخط الناس رضي الله عنه وأرضى عليه الناس. Sunan al-Tirmidhi. Whoever seeks the pleasure of Allah at the risk, there was a risk, they should have took that risk, seeks the pleasure of Allah at the risk of displeasing people, Allah will be pleased with a promise. Does Allah fulfill His promises? Allah will be pleased with him and will make people pleased with him. Promise from Allah. Listen, and this is exactly what happened here, the second part of the hadith. But whoever seeks the pleasure of people at the risk of displeasing Allah, Allah will abandon him, will be displeased at him, and will make the people abandon him and be displeased at him. Sunan al-Tirmidhi. All the benefit is living under the shade of the legislation of the one who knows best what suits us. ألا يعلم من خلق. The fitna, all the fitna is living under man-made laws in countries that were founded on La ilaha illallah. You hear the rags who call themselves shuyukh encouraging Muslims to accept secular states. Does a Muslim, let alone a sheikh, even talk like that? Since when do Muslims talk like this? And a leader? Our enemy doesn't need enemies. Our ummah doesn't need enemies. When we get the ruwaybidah, the rags calling the rule of Allah a fantasy. The rule of Allah in the Quran is a fantasy. Application of Allah's laws in Muslim countries is a fantasy. For one who suckled Islam from the intelligence of the West, yes, it's a fantasy. The Quran I memorized, and every single tafsir I read and studied by ijma' says something way different from what those rags, those ruwaybidah say. Let him and his foolish audience go open any of the mothers of the tafsir and tell me what the mufassirin said about these ayat. ثُمَّ جَعَلْنَاكَ على شريعة من الأمر فاتبعها ولا تتبع أهواء الذين لا يعلمون وما كان لمؤمن ولا مؤمنة إذا قضى الله ورسوله أمرا أن يكون لهم الخيرة من أمرهم ومن يعص الله ورسوله فقد ضل ضلالا مبينا إنا أنزلنا إليك الكتاب بالحق لتحكم بين الناس بما أراك الله ولا تكن للخائنين خصيما إن الحكم إلا لله يقص الحق وهو خير الفاصلين ما لهم من دونه من ولي ولا يشرك في حكمه أحدا. In tens more of ayat in a hadith. That's a fantasy. The Ruwaybidah, they think the hudud, they're fools. They think the hudud are all that it is in Islam. Like cut in the hand or zina punishment. That's part of the Sharia of Allah. But they make it like that's the only thing. The Rawaybidah don't know that's a small portion, a small percentage of the rule of Allah. Islam has an entire economic system to be proud of. That must be established in our lands. If they wanna succeed in every aspect, it has laws and rules. Muhyiddin al-Qurra, contemporary man, wrote a contemporary book on the laws, Islamic laws of debt, and laws of stocks and bonds and investments and many other matters and details pertaining to Islam's economic. It's not just about, that's part of it. It's not just about cutting the hand and hudud and ridda. Contemporary books that talk in depth and detail about Islam's Islamic economic laws, Al-Dabbu wrote about it. Abu al-A'la al-Mawdudi wrote about it. Al-Ayadi wrote about it. Al-Badawi, Ismail ibn Ibrahim al-Badawi wrote about it. And tens others wrote about the Islamic laws in Sharia and finance. It's not just about cutting the hand and the ridda that they have an issue with. It's an entire way of life. Islam has labor law. You know what's funny? Is sometimes there's Islamic laws, some of them are broad and encompass the discretion of a Khalifa or whoever he appoints. And sometimes they may be like non-Muslim laws. The Rawaybidah would be willing to praise and glorify it as laws of Islam, but not because it's laws of Islam, because it's laws of others. No pride, no pride. After I finished Medina, I returned here and got a master's degree in law. It's called the LLM. Specifically, actually, when you go in a master's degree in law, you got to choose an area. Mine was in labor law. My thesis was on aspects of labor law in Islam. The professor became interested in Islam. He used to sit me for hours and hours asking questions about Islam. This was before the internet era where they could look up stuff and check about Islam. It wasn't widespread back then. I remember one time he said, those references you've been using in this thesis, how old are they? I said, well, the verses I used and the hadith that I used, they're about 14 centuries old. They were revealed to the Prophet ﷺ 14 centuries ago. But the rest of the books were approximately 400 years ago, 700 years ago. I believe the most recent one was maybe 400 years ago. We went on talking for months and months. He told me at one time, I'm surprised such in-depth details of laws haven't dominated the world. And all I thought, it was just a small thesis on a few issues of labor law. That's a non-Muslim, but the Rawaybidah undermine the Islamic law legislated by Allah.